Okay, so there were some other black codes. There were so-called vagrancy laws. Um, and these vagrancy laws, again, the big picture here is what you have is this coordination between local law enforcement and the planners of the region, where the law enforcement is kind of ensuring that African Americans are working, they're ensuring the control of the labor and movement and the activities of African Americans in the post-war South. Um, so there were vagrancy laws, and a vagrancy law is someone can be arrested just for hanging out. And what you had was, is let's say, I noticed that there's that new movie. It's like Barbershop 2 or something. Anyway, the Barbershop is a very famous place for African Americans just to hang out, to gossip, to just be together, right? It's a space, it's a safe space. So let's say you're just hanging out at a barbershop, and you're just kind of spending the afternoon there. Well, under these vagrancy laws that were passed in some states, you could be arrested for idleness. You could be fined. And here's where it gets insidious again. Your work could be leased out. So let's say you're just hanging out one afternoon. You get arrested by the local police because they define you as a vagrant. You end up in jail. You are then leased out. A planner comes in, pays the local sheriff a certain amount of money for your labor. So you're leased out and without pay, of course, and you're working for this local planner. And if you run away from this planner, suddenly now you're a criminal. You're running away from the law. And so classic. Once again, what you're seeing, and this convict lease system would be very, very important in the South for easily the next 100 years, if not longer. And once again, it talks to the close ties between law enforcement and kind of the important economic actors in the region. There was another law that made it illegal to hunt and fish in certain areas. And the reason for this was that if you could hunt and you could fish, you could take care of yourself. You didn't need to work for anybody. And so there were laws that were, anti-poaching laws were established that stopped freedmen from hunting and fishing in areas that had been open before. And again, the idea is that white society, after the Civil War, does not want African Americans, does not want freed slaves to be able to take care of themselves. They want freed slaves to be under some kind of control, and they want their labor, especially cheap labor, available. And much like, although not exactly like, it had been in the days of slavery. So northern whites who are not really that sympathetic to freedmen, to African Americans, even northern whites who were racist don't like what they're seeing with these black codes. They're not stupid. It's very clear who the black codes are aimed after. They're aimed towards, rather. It's very clear that it's trying to reestablish what you might want to call a legal form of slavery, creating a legal net around the labor and the activity of African Americans. And again, this feeds into the growing backlash, the growing anger of northern whites against the white South in the period after the Civil War. The white South was just not acting like a defeated region. And I guess if you're a neo-Confederate, or you're sympathetic to the South, you can go, yeah, look at them. No one's going to beat them down. They've got so much Southern pride, blah, blah. Well, you know what? If you take a look at it, what this is based on, it's based on the same kind of racial oppression and the same kind of racial hierarchies and the same kind of exploitation of African Americans that had been in existence since slavery had coalesced in the middle of the 1600s. It's really not that much to be proud of. In fact, it's not something I think Southerners, white Southerners, should be proud of at all. It's really quite shameful. Um, and so what you're having is that, again, white Northerners in combination with the white South sending ex-Confederates, or at least trying to send ex-Confederates back into Congress, um, that they're saying, what's going on in the white South? Maybe Johnson's being too easy on these white Southerners. Maybe we should go in and, maybe we should take control, a little bit more control over what's going on. Maybe African Americans need protection. Maybe African Americans need the protection of the U.S. Army. And very, very few white Northerners thought this when the Civil War ended, let's say in April of 1865. But a year later, let's say a little bit longer, by the summer of 1866, there's a growing consensus among Northern whites that something has to be done in the South. That there'd been the creation of a kind of a legal form of slavery through these various black codes. Blacks are being terrorized. And one of the most prominent examples of this murder and intimidation of freedmen happens in New Orleans in the summer of 1866. What you have in the summer of 1866 is there's a meeting in New Orleans of about 200 African Americans and a smaller number of their white allies, Southerners who were not happy with how blacks were being treated. And so there's a meeting in New Orleans. And this meeting demanded the end of the black codes that had been written into the Louisiana Constitution. They wanted those black codes voided. This meeting demanded that African Americans be granted the right to vote, be granted suffrage, which was not happening at all. I mean, it was the furthest thing from the minds of white Southerners to give African Americans the right to vote. And what you had was, instead of whites in New Orleans listening to these demands, which don't seem to me to be that outrageous, what you have is, once again, local law enforcement combines with kind of a quasi-militia made up in many cases of these ex-Confederates. And they surround this structure where this meeting is being held, this meeting of mostly African Americans and some whites. And they start shooting at it. They just start shooting. Very quickly, the meeting breaks up. These men wave white handkerchiefs outside the window to indicate that they're coming out peacefully. But they're not allowed to come out peacefully. And when the day is over, what you have in New Orleans in the summer of 1866 is a massacre. It's the murder of 34 African Americans, some whites, mostly African American, who had met peacefully in a peaceful meeting to talk about the outrage of the black codes and to demand black suffrage, to demand the right to vote as Americans. And in response, what do the people of New Orleans do? What do the local police do? What do the militia do? They stage a massacre, and they murder these people, and they kill them in cold blood. Now, you have another massacre of African Americans in Nashville later that year. And it's at this point where white Northerners really have had it with the white South, the behavior of the white South. And to go back for a second to get the big picture, uh, at the end of the Civil War, I would say most white Northerners were very moderate Republicans. Of course, a lot of white Northerners were Democrats, right? But many moderates in the North who kind of, after the Civil War, wanted to adopt a live or let live policy with the white South. By the summer of 1866, they have been radicalized. But what has radicalized them? What's radicalized them is the behavior of white Southerners in the post-war period. The attempt to reestablish control over the movement and the labor of African Americans, the terror and the intimidation of freed slaves in the post-war period, and then the outright murder of African Americans that were meeting peacefully to demand basic political rights. And then you combine this with the attempt of the southern states to send ex-Confederates back into Washington, to the Senate, to the House of Representatives. And this is a recipe for a major, major backlash among Northern whites. And that's what you start to see. And Northern whites as a whole, but especially Republicans who still control things, especially in Congress, they move to the left. They move towards the position of the radicals. And the split between the Republicans in Congress and Andrew Johnson becomes very, very deep. And what you have by the summer of 1866 is there is absolutely no agreement between the Republicans in Congress, the moderates and the radicals, and Andrew Johnson. The executive, the president of the United States, in effect, has gone to war with the congressional branch of the United States. It's not a shooting war, but they just have profound disagreements because Andrew Johnson is okay with the black codes. Andrew Johnson is okay with ex-Confederates coming back into Congress because remember, Andrew Johnson is trying to curry favor with Andrew Johnson is trying to curry favor with white Southerners. That's the direction that he wants to go. And he's hoping to create a coalition of white Southerners and racist Democrats in the North that will at the very least get him elected president in 1868. So what you have, as I say before, the executive branch and the congressional branch are completely at loggerheads, more than at any time in our history. We have that somewhat today between Obama, who's a Democrat, and the Republican-controlled Congress. But what we have today is absolutely nothing compared to the split between the executive and the Congress by the summer of 1866. And what you're having is more and more Northern whites are saying, we've got to do something about what's going on in the South. And here's the key point, and this is the last thing I'll talk about today. There's an election coming up in 1866. It's a mid-year election. It's not a presidential election, but it's a mid-year election. And if the moderates and the Republicans, if they can gain more than 2/3 majority in Congress, they can do anything they want without the fear of a presidential veto. And so that's what the Republicans in Congress start aiming for in the election of 1866, to create a veto-proof majority in Congress, in the House and the Senate, where Andrew Johnson cannot stop them from doing what they want to do in the South.